Welcome everybody here and online. Welcome, Stefan. Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Stefan Flagner will defend the academic thesis, Indoor Air, Human Cognition and Health. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Thank you, dear Prorector. 74 years. You will spend 74 years of your life indoors. Dear members of the committee, dear family, friends, colleagues. Today, I would like to show you scientific evidence why you should open the windows. I want to show you why indoor air quality affects your health, affects your cognitive performance, and might even make you wealthier. Let's first discuss what indoor air quality is. There are two main sources of indoor air quality in a room, which is the building material and which is humans. If you talk about the building material, I talk about your coffee machine, I talk about the carpet, the painting, I talk about the furniture, maybe also the printer. And all of these, they constantly emit air dust and other organic compounds who collect in this room. You are also a source of air pollution because you constantly exhale carbon dioxide and you also exhale other organic compounds, and you can't do anything against that. You should also not stop breathing. And these organic compounds, they will collect in the room. They will collect in the room in concentration increase if there is not enough fresh air from outside coming in. So being said that, one of the main ways to improve indoor air quality is through ventilation and through letting fresh air from the outside, which is low in this concentration of air pollutants, entering the room. Assuming that the outdoor air pollution is, of course, low, because in some regions of this world that might not be the case, but in European cities that's common the case. So we use CO2 as an indicator of indoor air quality. Why? Because when you emit other organic substances, when you breathe them out, you also breathe out CO2 as a natural process of your human metabolism. Which also means if CO2 is rising in concentration, that means also these organic compounds are rising in concentration. And there are many building guidelines who use CO2, therefore, as a general metric of air quality. If CO2 is high in concentration, air quality is bad. If CO2 is low in concentration, air quality is good. They have this guideline saying that 1,000 ppm, which is parts per million, so a measure of concentration, it should be below that one in order to be considered good air quality. Now that you understand what air quality is, I would like to talk about why are we here and what is the most important question, which is why does air quality actually matter for you? Well, it's very simple because it sticks with you for a lifetime, right? You work indoors, you sleep indoors, you eat indoors, you even are in the car indoors, so most of your time you're indoors. Remember that I said 76 years of your life you're indoors. If you want to go so far, you even leave this earth indoors in a coffin. Although health concerns are less obsolete in that regards. So today, because air quality affects your life, I want to talk about air quality in schools, in universities. I want to talk about CO2 as a very important measure and the specifications of CO2. And I also want to talk about if maybe improving in air quality makes you wealthy. First of all, I want to talk about schools, because that's where your life also starts. This nice fresque from Raphael, from Vatican City, is called the School of Athens. And in the middle you can see Aristotle and Platon. Aristotle, a Greek philosopher, is famously known for having walks with his students outside. Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher, said once, all truly great thoughts come to you as you walk. My friend Kimon here, he likes to do also these walks outside with his students. However, I was wondering, is it maybe not just being outside walking, but also the fresh air which helps students? So the first thing I did is I collected indoor air quality data for 61 classrooms in 7 primary schools here in the Netherlands. And I had a simple question. Does a kid in a badly ventilated room performs worse in test scores compared to a kid in a well-ventilated room? And indeed, I found that if the air quality is worse, then a kid is performing worse in these test scores. Statistically, you can think of what I did by imagining that you have a twin, or you have twins, and you put one twin in one well-ventilated room, the other twin in the less well-ventilated room, and then the twin in the well-ventilated room is scoring 15 points higher or 7.5% better in the test scores. I also showed that this is independent of sickness. I would have assumed that a kid which is more often sick needs a harder time to catch up with learning material, so the effect is more pronounced there. However, independent of if a kid is sick very often or not at all, this 15% drop still persists. Let's put that magnitude a little bit into perspective, right? So there are calculations saying that class size reduction, so reducing the amount of students per teacher, is another way to improve learning in kids. And these calculations say that if you reduce the class size from 25 to 15 students, you increase, in our case, the test scores by 4 points, because it's 0.1 standard deviation increase, which costs you around 1,200 euros per child. Which means for the 15 points drop, which I found in my study, we would need to spend around 4,500 euros per child. To put that into perspective, there are other studies showing that the energy costs from increasing your ventilation is increasing by between 10 and 16 euros per person. So you clearly see the differences in magnitude of how much you have to spend to improve learning. Another comparison is the COVID-19 pandemic, which by one paper has shown reduces test scores by also 4 points. So the impact of air quality, which I found in my study, is even stronger than a global pandemic. So better air quality improves learning and test performance in school children. The question is that the same in university? Because you can think that in university, it's organized differently. You spend less time in class. You can spend more time learning by yourself in the library or at home. So we cannot just say that what we find in primary schools is the same in university. That's why I conducted my second study. I took the first year bachelor cohort here as a business school. That's around 1,200 students. I split them into 2 groups. One group had their classes in a control building. The other group, their class in a treatment building. The difference is that the treatment building was completely renovated. It has the state-of-the-art ventilation system, air conditioning, heating, you name it, and it was even certified to be a healthy building. And then I had a simple question, which is, do the students in the treatment building have a higher course grade compared to the students in the control building? First of all, I found that indoor air quality in the treatment building is indeed better, which is very good because universities spend also the money on improving that and certifying it, so this is fulfilled. I also found if we ask students what they think about how air quality affects their performance, that they were thinking it helped them to perform better when they were in the treatment building. However, there is no change in course grades. So again, even that the grades did not change, students were thinking that the air quality helped them to perform better. So it seems that indoor air quality plays less of a role at university education compared to primary education. But I also talked about CO2, carbon dioxide. Remember, you breathe out CO2, you breathe out other organic compounds. If ventilation is very low or insufficient, so air quality is bad, CO2 also rises. In my first study about primary schools, I could see that if the CO2 level is very high in a building, test score is lower. But the question is that the CO2 or is it the other air pollutants which is causing that? So in my laboratory study, what I wanted to look at is exactly at the effect of CO2. We had 20 healthy subjects. We put them into an airtight room for 8 hours. And the ventilation was the same this time in both conditions. The only difference was that in the high CO2 condition, I induced extra CO2. Because again, remember, I want to see the isolated effect of CO2 by removing the other air pollutants. I gave them concentration tests during these 8 hours, and I measured several parameters of health, like blood pressure, heart rate, among other things. And then I had this simple question: do the people, when they are in the high CO2 condition, perform worse in the cognition tests, and is there any physiological reaction from that? There was no effect. There was no effect on CO2, which means it doesn't matter where somebody was sitting in the low or high CO2 condition. In average, the difference in the test scores they performed during this cognition test did not differ between low or high CO2. Also, there was no difference in health parameters. Heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rate, CO2 level in the blood, they did not change between these two conditions. So why CO2 is a useful metric of indoor air quality? It's most likely not the cause of this effect we find in the primary schools. Well, I would not be a good economist if I would not ask myself how much does it cost me and can I make money out of that one, right? But the problem is, if we ask ourselves we want to make money out of improving indoor air quality, there is a crux, which is energy efficiency. And the newspaper calls it an inefficient love affair. Because especially we Germans, we like to ventilate. We have this word called Stoßlüften, or impact ventilation. We even do that in winter or summer. Rachel is complaining when I do that in winter. And apparently the newspaper says that this is very inefficient. Why? Because if you do it in winter or summer, hot or cold air is entering the room, which also means you have to spend more energy for heating or air conditioning and cooling the room. So the energy efficiency is literally going out of the window when you open it. But you also want to have good air quality, right? So my question was, is there a way to make a profitable investment by combining energy efficiency and indoor air quality? And for that, I gathered also 10 experts in that field. And then in my last chapter, we wrote a review about that. First of all, energy efficiency is a very good way to improve the property value of your house. Yeah? There's a lot of studies done way before me which showed already if you improve the energy efficiency of your house, you can ask for a higher price when you sell it, you can ask for higher rent when you are a landlord. So energy efficiency is not just good for the climate and for the environment, it also is good for your wallet. But is that the same with indoor air quality? Because remember, if we want to improve indoor air quality, we might sacrifice a little bit of energy efficiency. Unfortunately, there is not a lot of work done. In my review, which I wrote with my experts, then I could see that there are only a few studies which looked into that one. But this is not sufficient evidence to come to the conclusion of saying that also investments into indoor air quality is a profitable business case. So there is more work to be done, but as said already before me, science can never be a closed book. So what have we learned today? We have learned that indoor air quality affects your learning performance and your test scores in school. We have learned that might be less important for the university. We also learned that CO2 is not the bad player, which is specifically important if you think about outdoor air pollution and the outdoor air being very polluted, because then you cannot just open the window, because then you let also polluted outdoor air coming in, right? But there are certain air filtration systems which can get rid of the fine dust and some organic compounds inside, but they cannot get rid of CO2. But now that we learned that CO2 is not a problem, you might not need to take care about reducing CO2. You can rather focus on reducing the concentration of the other compounds. And then lastly, better air quality might be profitable. And I say might be because there is some evidence going to that direction, but there is much more work which needs to be done. I hope you learned something. Thank you very much, and I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you, Stefan, for your presentation. The opposition will be opened by Professor Carla Halermans, who's Professor in Education Economics here at Maastricht University, and she's also chair of the assessment committee. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear candidates, dear Stefan, let me first start with congratulating you with this fine dissertation. I really enjoyed reading it, and I have a lot of admiration for the multidisciplinary nature of the thesis and also being able, like managing a multidisciplinary team, preparing publications for multidisciplinary audiences and outlets. It's not easy to find a common ground in language when you work with different disciplines. And although it's very much simulated in academics, I'm not always convinced that we as science are actually ready for it. So I'm always very happy when people do that. So a lot of kudos for that. And I also think the topic of your thesis is very relevant and important, especially also in educational settings, because that's the conditions we create for our children to learn in. And these conditions might matter more than we often like to acknowledge. And especially in primary education, as you said as well, children don't really have a choice. they have to go to school all day, and they are in those classrooms 5 days a week. But that's different in higher education, especially the situation here at Maastricht University with our PBL system. One might also argue that these conditions really matter much less. The students spend a lot less time in the classroom than in primary education. And that's also in line with what you find. But at the same time, I'm also wondering if that's actually true. And I'd like to challenge you to reflect a bit on that, and I'll explain a little bit more. So the first of the question that I have is related to chapter 3, but a little bit also to chapter 2, because there you do find an effect on performance, and in chapter 3 you don't. Because there are two things in chapter 3 that you mentioned that got me thinking. So one is the fact that you have a study period in between your two sample periods, where the conditions are the same for all the students. And another thing is that this new building that you use is also the building that a lot of students go to study in between, to hang out with their study friends. And of course, you cannot prevent control students and treatment students to go there. But I do wonder whether these two aspects of your study may have actually downsized the difference between the treatment and control groups such that you might not be able to find anything anymore. So you might actually have a power issue there instead of there actually not being an effect. So I would like to invite you to reflect a bit on how these two things and maybe other aspects may have influenced your results, or whether you think it's differently. Thank you.
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for this very good question and for your nice words. Indeed, I have thought about that for a while, because my first assumption was that exposure time is the main player here. If you think about that, children in school spend 4 to 6 hours every day in that environment. For students, that's, in our case, only 4 hours per week. The interesting thing, what we found, is that we split these two periods. We had period 1, which was September, October, and we had period 2, which was February and March. And we did that because these are first-year bachelor students, which means when they start the first time their education here in Maastricht in September, they were not exposed to the control group yet, to the control building, because these were the first courses they had, and they immediately got assigned to the treatment building. By the next period in between, they had already their classes at the control building. So there could be this effect, and it's quite likely to assume that if I ask somebody also about the perception that they perceive and are satisfied depending on their frame of references, it could be that there would be this effect that they know the control building by the time they redid they were included again into my study in period 2. What we tried to do is that we also looked at study hours, because we were thinking maybe there is this talk in between students, they recognize I'm not catching up, I need to put my study hours into that one. And there we at least found there is no difference in self-reported study hours between the two groups. There might be, of course, a difference in terms of a behavioral change that they figure out, I go to Tapine and I want to, because I can learn better in the treatment building. This is not what we controlled for, which is also a behavioral aspect, which would be a limitation of that study.
If I may interrupt with it, because I agree, but that's not exactly my question. The question is, I assume everything is the same between treatment and control group, but there is also, they also make a lot of use of the better building in between and in their non-class time. So maybe there is like these 4 hours of classes every week is just not enough to show an effect of the building, because for the rest of the time, all the students are in that building.
That could be assuming that it's not yeah. So that could be in terms of, the question we wanted to ask is, coming back to the exposure time of, indeed, if that would be the case, if the students in the treatment building are also liking the treatment building more, so they will stay there longer, right? So they are more exposed to this indoor environment, would also mean that they have higher exposure, so then we would actually expect an effect. So that we don't expect an effect could be diluted by the fact that the students from the control building equal out the other student, the other time they spend studying by going to the treatment building. That could be an effect which we could not control for because we don't have the data of where exactly they studied.
Thank you.
Your position will be continued by Professor Paweł Wagoki, who is professor at the Department of Environmental and Resource Engineering at the Technical University of Denmark. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and congratulations, Stefan, for making a presentation in 15 minutes of such a complex work that you did. I would probably not do it, but I mean, this is really amazing how you made the points. So, and of course, on your thesis. As you know, I'm very much interested in carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is, for those who are in the audience, also an important topic, not only because of the emission and the climate change, but also it has been debated a lot in the indoor air community because of the potential cognitive effects and also health effects at low dose levels, much lower than occupation limits. So I have a couple of questions, or maybe the question related to this, to chapter 4 and your study there. First of all, in your presentation, you presented that we should be below 1,000 ppm, so I would really like to understand why you did 3,000 ppm, not 1,000 ppm exposure. And then also for other studies, we have seen the effects at the lower levels that actually show that there is an effect of carbon dioxide on some aspects of cognitive performance. So I would like you to tell us why would there be a differences between, you know, no effect in your case at 3,000, and then there are some studies that show actually effects at the levels of even 1,000 ppm.
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for this question. So first of all, we took the 1,000 ppm as a threshold for low CO2 based on the guidelines that is basically the threshold they recommend. We take the 3,000 because in the schools we observed 3,000 was really the worst CO2 level we could find. I guess the papers you refer to are papers from Sachi, papers from Allen and co-authors, where they looked Sachi even looked at 4 different levels of CO2. I have to say for that paper, they found an effect for an increase of CO2 from very low to the second level. In terms of cognition went down, there was lower. But then for the higher CO2 level, they even found an improvement. So there is also inconsistency given for these papers. There is one paper by Rodeheffer, who looked at submariners, and they could not find any effect. Of course, these are submariners. The difference we wanted to do is that we added this multiple hypothesis testing, assuming that when you look at my table, before we do multiple hypothesis testing, we have some positive and some negative effects, which are also significant, but they are just not robust. Of course, there can be a decision about maybe the cognition test we used is not the same as what Allen or Sachi used, because they used the strategic management simulator. That's why in the discussion we try to make the point of saying for basic cognitive function, which we measure, there might be not an effect of CO2. For complex strategic decision making, to be fair, we did not measure that.
Okay. Thank you.
Your position will be continued by Dr. Ingo Isvording. He's Senior Research Associate at the Germany Institute of Labor Economics, ISA, and he's joining us online.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I can you hear me? Yes, okay. Yeah, so I can only follow up on my predecessors that I really, really liked reading your study. And I guess I learned a lot on a topic which I was not so fully aware of before. I want to ask questions about chapter 2, in which you treat the indoor air quality as a purely exogenous variable for teachers and students. And while I understand why air quality on the outside can be interpreted such as this, I was wondering, when we switch to indoor air quality, you mentioned it yourself, then venting or simply switching rooms are options to improve air quality for learning conditions. And as such, I would guess this is rather an endogenous variable, which opens up the possibilities for that teachers who improve the air quality by their behavior are simply different ones from those who do not. And how would you treat this then empirically, so that you really are confident that you only capture the effect of the indoor air quality?
Dearly highly esteemed opponent, thank you for this question. As I understand it, the question is more towards if indoor air quality is exogenous or endogenous in that regards. There might be the way how CO2 and air quality can be endogenous could be indeed that there is effect on teachers. Teachers might be aware of that there is bad air quality, and then they change the behavior in this bad air quality condition. So there would be an endogenous effect of indoor air quality. You can deal with that in two ways. One way is, which we did not do, but which you can do, is you can use a proxy for indoor air quality which is independent of teacher, which is, for example, the presence of mechanical ventilation, because independent of which teacher is there is mechanical ventilation or not. So we could say presence of mechanical ventilation is an exogenous variable. Here in this study, we didn't randomize based on air quality, we randomized on the two buildings. So the limitation of that study is in that regards that in the treatment building it was much more different, not just in air quality, but also in other parameters. However, what we did is we used the teacher fixed effect by letting the same teacher teach several classes in both buildings and had to switch during the same day. So what we did statistically is basically we compared different groups by keeping the teacher fixed to at least allow controlling for these teacher behavior which might make some things endogenous.
Thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Professor Dr. Kenneth Meyer, who is Professor of Human Movement Sciences here at Maastricht University. The floor is yours.
Dear candidate, first of all, congratulations with a very nice booklet, great presentation. I like that you include the classics in your presentation and your booklet. I also would like to acknowledge that you have been a fresh breath of air in our department, coming from a completely different field and putting up with physiologists, all that sorts. But I'm not here just to compliment you, and I would like to start with maybe having proposition number 10 being read out by one of your paranymphs.
Proposition number 10. Discipline equals freedom. Jocko Willink.
That's a firm statement, and my initial impression was this is a very German statement. I confirmed with one of your supervisors, and he felt the same. So I actually went to YouTube, checked out Jocko Willink, and I spent half an hour biology department. But I think there was some merit in it. It basically mentions that you should not go for the quick decisions, you should force yourself to be disciplined. And I think you require some military discipline in your project, having 6 supervisors, 3 departments, 2 faculties. So also a lot of compliments there. But it also made me think about what really boosts performance in education. And you've spent significant effort in trying to show, or trying to test, this may be a better phrase, whether air quality has an effect. If I summarize it very broadly, I would say you have 2 negative trials and 1 trial with a very small effect. So haven't you been looking, if your interest is educational performance, at the wrong parameters? And shouldn't you consider other things like discipline, or maybe, as shown in the Pantheon, people not just sitting and learning, but also walking and standing and learning. So could you maybe position your work relative to all these other mediators of teaching, and then from an economic perspective, mention where you would put your money?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for that question. I was surprised that you asked an economic question, but of course I'd like to answer that one. Coming first to when I hear
I was also surprised.
When I hear what you say, I think about one paper in the field of inner air quality, a study done by Katja and Herzog. I'm bad with names with that, but 2 Hungarian researchers. They did a study about also air quality and CO2 and how it affects performance, and they actually found that the effort somebody puts in can offset the negative effect of air quality on cognitive performance, at least for some time. So there seems to be, and Bovendu has a very good systematic review making also this point that the mental effort or the discipline you put into working can offset some of this. On the other hand, I still think I collected the correct outcomes, given that the outcomes which matter later for having a good university degree, for having a higher likelihood to be hired by a good company, for predicting how much income you will spend, you will get later, are at the end your grades at school and your grades at university. Nevertheless, and that's the other thing I want to add is I have another proposition 6, I think, talking about the complexity of cognitive performance. So I use test scores as a proxy for learning outcomes. But of course, you can also talk about different cognitive performance and how that is affected by air quality.
Yeah, and which other performance metrics would you consider then?
Well, in the CANTEP cognition test I used in my laboratory study, I looked at psychomotor control, which is very much something you are familiar with. I looked at memory, I looked at executive functioning, so the baseline metrics. There are these studies by Allen and co-authors or Sachi and co-authors who look at strategic decision making. In the laboratory study, we also looked at risk behavior using an economic metric. So we wanted to see as another example of decision making, which...
Yeah, but clearly none of these metrics gave you, well, at least positive effects of the CO2. Maybe feeding back to your mental effort, is there a relationship with exposure? And maybe if people were put into situations with high CO2 and were really exhausted, because I think that's, to me, at least one of the caveats in your chapter 4, that you studied the effect of CO2, but you let the people basically go about their own business instead of really stressing them. Would that have changed the results of chapter 4?
So you talk about a performance-induced effect.
Yeah.
We looked at that one in our in my lab study. What we did is I also looked at stress markers like heart rate or blood pressure at the moment they conduct the CANTEP tests, and not just over the day, because they had this idea of if they are exposed to stress because they have to perform, maybe then they have to put more effort in. At least there I found that respiration, breathing rate is increasing during the time they do this test when they are in the high CO2 condition. But heart rate, blood pressure as a metric of stress did not differ during this time of cognition when stress is imposed.
So the basic question is, should you have made your tasks more stressful? And would you have find different results then?
That is a discussion why, for example, the study by Allen and co-authors might have an effect of carbon dioxide because they look at complex strategic decision making. I looked at baseline cognitive functioning like memory, right? So there could be indeed a relation, and it is an ongoing discussion in my field, which is outside of the scope of my studies, indeed.
Thanks a lot for your answers.
Your position will be continued by Dr. Dusan Licina, who is Associate Professor of Sustainable and Healthy Built Environment at École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in Switzerland, and he is joining us online.
Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure being part of the committee for this PhD defense. Dear Stefan, I really enjoyed reading your thesis, and both me and my daughter are really big fans of the cover design. So yeah, great work on that. So of course there are many questions, and yeah, I will be very selective, so I'm going to ask only one question. Related to chapter number 2, where you study the relationship between poor indoor air quality and student test scores, and you relied on previously collected indoor environmental quality data in multiple schools, and this data set included CO2, particulate matter, and other variables, but you decided to focus only on carbon dioxide, and you decided to exclude particulate matter variable, stating that there might be high correlation with carbon dioxide, and so there is a risk of multicollinearity. I would like to ask if you could elaborate why particulate matter parameter was excluded, given that according to the existing literature, particulate matter could be a good predictor of cognitive abilities and test scores. So did you look into both joint effect of particulate matter and carbon dioxide and separate effect of particulate matter only?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for this question. I had to struggle indeed with the decision if I have to include fine particulate matter in my regression or not. Indeed, as you said, the problem is that they were highly correlated, so there was a huge endogeneity problem if I would include CO2 and PM. You could discuss by, instead of using CO2, putting PM in as another proxy of indoor air quality. Although I must say, if I understand your question correctly, if I want to look at the effect of PM independent of CO2, I would need to rely on a variation of PM exposure compared to CO2 exposure in my sample size to do it statistically clean. Differently said, I would need to have classrooms where CO2 is high, PM is low, or PM is high, CO2 is low. That would be an interesting question, which is limited by my sample size because of this correlation.
Okay. I like the response. Thanks.
The opposition will be continued by Dr. Inge Hoekes, who's Associate Professor in Occupational Health at the Department of Social Medicine here at Maastricht University. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear candidate, first I would like to congratulate you and your rather extensive promotion team on this fine and relevant thesis, which brings together, as somebody mentioned already, various disciplines in the fields of research: real estate, building physics, technology, economy, public health, and a bit of occupational health. I have read your thesis with great interest. It provides valuable starting points for the improvement of indoor quality of our buildings. I have several questions as well, of course, which relate, maybe not surprisingly for you, to the transferability of your findings to occupational health. I will stick to one question to begin with. In chapter 5, in the subsection about question 2, you describe that the thermal environment in buildings has an impact on occupants and workers. I often visit organizations and factories which make products such as tiles or fried snacks, and employees must work near hot ovens in buildings with steel roofs that tend to warm up quickly, especially during summer. I can also imagine that these ovens and the raw materials used in these factories emit several chemicals and other pollutants. And employees complain quite a lot. So the perceived indoor air quality is low. Regardless, employers can or will not do much about this situation. For instance, the buildings cannot be cooled or only at very high costs. And employers, for instance, hand out extra water or ice cream as a kind of compensation. So based on your results and your knowledge about indoor air quality, would you be able to build a business case already that would help convince employers to invest in thermal environment or air quality? Or do you have any other recommendations to improve this thermal environment? And alternatively, if not, if you cannot formulate such recommendations yet, what kind of studies, field studies or laboratory studies, would you propose to get more insight into which adjustments should be made in factories to improve this environment?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for this very interesting question. Again, there is a study which comes into my mind, which is the study actually looking at switching from light bulbs to LED light, which also reduces the heat exposure because these old light bulbs, they emit a lot of heat, and they did it in a garment factory in India. I forgot the co-authors, but I know that in my 10-question paper, in my chapter 5, I have mentioned them. And they could see that productivity in terms of number of outputs per worker is increasing after they did this switch, most likely because there was less heat stress from that. With my studies and with the field I'm in, we look more into office work where measuring productivity or work performance is a more challenging thing than in terms of a factory where you have a clear input-output relationship. So a business case, for example, for that study with the light, they could indeed do because they could calculate the reduction in energy cost by switching to LED light. Also the reduction in air conditioning if they would have it, right? And they could also calculate the increase in productivity and how that relates to economic terms. But then again, if it comes to office work, measuring productivity is a completely different story than in a manufacturing setting.
Yes, I agree. There are some options for that. But if you would have the opportunity to conduct a field study, for instance, and find more evidence or solutions, how would you go about?
In a manufacturing setting or in...
Yes, factory.
In a manufacturing setting, for example, Moser factory is a nice example, right? What I would need is, I would need the reduction in, and either an increase in energy cost because we use air conditioning, assuming now that the heat is coming from the machines and they have to emit heat anyways because they have to run, so we need to include air conditioning. So we have an increase in energy costs, right? And then I need to compare that with how does it increase the output of worker as one metric. But I can also look maybe at things like sick leave, right? Because I can also see if the heat stress leads to a higher level of sick leave, which is basically a company pays a salary, but the output is not conducted. So sick leave would also have an economic effect. And then a rather soft skill measure would be general well-being or satisfaction, which maybe could be measured either via a survey or looking at the turnover rate of these employees, assuming that they feel more comfortable now with the changes. There's also a lower likelihood that they will switch the jobs after a while, right? Which is also related to costs the HR department would have to constantly hire new people. And this has to be compared with the increase cost of energy, of higher energy consumption.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Your position will be continued by Professor Frans Fürst, who is Professor of Real Estate and Urban Economics at the University of Cambridge. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear candidate, let me preface my brief question by commending you on achieving such a great feat of interdisciplinarity here and achieving straddling so many different disciplines, engineering, finance, economics, epidemiology, a lot of them. And perhaps it's no coincidence that your kind of visual clues there harken back to Renaissance and Roman and Greek antiquity. And I think what this work represents is, and marks you out as a 21st century Renaissance man, if I may say so. So, but to my question, and they concern, or my question concerns chapter 5 and 6 on the healthy building business case. And whether we can or should make people pay for good or perfect or optimal indoor air quality, or whether it is to be considered a basic public good or even a basic human right. And let me just frame it quickly, maybe, if you accept that framework, that we could either think of it as a negative externality or a positive externality. If it is a negative externality, then there is inefficiency. And we can pay or expect, if it is a service, then you get rid of the inefficiency, then, well, maybe it is to be paid or not to be paid. If it is a positive externality, it could be viewed in the same sense as, let's say, getting more education, like a university degree, where the argument in favor of university tuition fees could be, well, you're not just doing something good for society, you're improving your own productivity improves your market worth, your wage. In the same way, you could argue about improving indoor air quality, making you more productive, in which case it would be a service to pay for. So which of the two would you say is it? A negative externality, a public good, or a service to be paid for? Thank you.
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for the question. Just to clarify it, so you want to see, is improving indoor air quality a positive or negative externality, correct?
Yes, yes. Correct.
So first of all, I must cite the first sentence of my introduction, which is in 2022, the United States passed a revolution that having access to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a human right. So I agree with you on the fact that indoor air quality is a human right. This is why I started my introduction like that. Again, there is another paper where I forgot the authors about that, but what I wanted to see is what is the macroeconomic benefits of improving indoor air quality. And they have a very interesting view about that one, because they assume that if higher indoor air quality leads to more productivity, it can lead to a higher average income, which can also lead to higher tax revenues for the government. And then we can talk about an optimal subsidy for improving indoor air quality. So in that regards, I would say that improving indoor air quality is a positive externality because of these macroeconomic effects. If we look at children, the macroeconomic effects are even higher, because we know from many other studies that better school grades are highly correlated with higher income later in life, which is highly correlated with health later in life. So by improving air quality, therefore improving grades, therefore improving income and health later in life, we have also less healthcare costs.
Excellent, thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Professor Dr. Jaap Bos, who is Professor of Banking and Finance here at Maastricht University.
Thank you. Dear candidate, so I'm going to try to make two wishes come true. First, can the other panel please read Proposition 11? Yes.
Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own. Bruce Lee.
Thank you. That's the first wish. Your second wish was a question like Martin Laudy got, so let's see. You use experimental setups and RCTs or something as close as possible to an RCT in all of your work, actually. And so for me, an RCT is a great tool for studying simple, if sometimes very unexpected effects, right? It's a great way of trying to find out whether our intuition is correct or not. You could argue that actually when it's showing that our intuition is not correct, it's maybe the most interesting. But when I read your thesis, and in particular, chapters, well, actually all chapters, what I was struck with is there's a lot of complexity. And there's complexity in two ways. One, there's a complexity even in the, let's say, simple treatment effect that you're trying to get after. So a question was already raised about, is it, are there thresholds? Does life change when we go beyond 1,000 parts per million, for example? So that suggests that maybe even in a simple setting, the relationship between, for example, cognitive performance and indoor air quality is far from linear, but there might be threshold effects, it might be nonlinear in other ways, right? Second, if I look at chapter 2, for example, you start talking about mediators, which again is an example of the fact that the treatment, the real treatment, is not the straightforward treatment effect that you impose, but it's more complex. So complexity abounds. So if, since I'm the last one in this first round, under ideal circumstances, if you could redo one of your chapters and account much more for this complexity, how would you do that? And in particular, so to help you along a little bit, would you basically say, well, give me, under ideal circumstances, give me unlimited resources, and I would just try everything. So I would try every mediator, I would try every treatment size, and just to find out, basically sort of reverse engineer what the real relationship is like? Or would you prioritize? And if so, based on what way would you do that? I look forward to your answer.
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for making my two wishes come true. First of all, the thing with RCTs is that we, for example, for my lab study, we have 20 subjects. We assume that we control them, that the only difference between them is basically the condition, everything else is equal. Of course, there can be underlying factors which are mediating the effect of CO2 on my outcome, let it be health or let it be cognition, right? Which are then for some reason in these 20 subjects biased, which could then lead to a biased result. On the other hand, because I chose these two subjects random, I would assume that also these underlying unobserved factors are also randomly distributed, so they would not matter in my case. Although if you...
That would only be the case if those mediating factors would vary between the subjects. But if they would vary in other ways, then that would not be the case, right? So increasing sample size and trusting randomization works if those mediating factors differ from, let's say, in chapter 2, child to child. But the moment that they differ from location to location, for example, then that would not work. Do you agree?
I would agree if I would not have a whiff in subject design. If I have a whiff in subject design, so I compare the subject with each other through the two conditions.
Again, I agree, but so my point is not to say that I don't trust your treatment effect. My point is to say that the real channel, the real way in which this treatment effect actually sort of occurs, so in other words, in terms of, let's say, what we want, what can we learn from this, what's what's the next step, might be more complex than simply the treatment that you include in the RCT. So my question is about the link between the real world, how does this really work, and to what extent is the RCT capturing that?
Mm-hmm. It is a question of causality, right? So it's again the question that at the beginning we had this big sample size, we could see that CO2 affects cognitive performance just to figure out that it correlates. So it could be the same here. As long as we don't understand the mechanisms, the underlying physiological mechanisms, which is what I wanted to do, we cannot clearly say that there is this causal mechanism. However, the question is more, do we need that in order to derive to recommendations, right? In this case, if we figure out that indoor air quality consistently has a negative effect on cognitive performance, do I really need to know the mechanisms, or do I just need to know for school boards to improve ventilation? Coming back to your second question, what would be optimal? What would I improve? I would definitely improve chapter 2, my school study with primary schools, in several things. Number one, I need a far bigger sample size, especially because one of the limits is that I don't have another proxy for indoor air quality, which would be the presence of mechanical ventilation. So the issues we discussed before, is CO2 maybe endogenous because there's teacher behavior, I could rule out by having a dummy on mechanical ventilation. In these schools, only one school had no mechanical ventilation, the other ones had it. So with a bigger sample size, I would hope for more of a variation between mechanical ventilation. I would also like to have data on teachers. In my chapter with the university, we could equal out kind of the effect of teaching quality because we have this fixed effect on teacher. In my school study, I have a fixed effect on the child and also on the classroom, so I kind of control for these effects. Nevertheless, I still don't know if maybe air quality is affecting the teacher's cognitive performance, which really lowers the teaching quality, or it affects the kids' learning performance, or both. So a study which is really missing in the field of school is to look at both teaching quality and how it relates to air quality, and children test performance and disentangle this effect.
Thank you.
So this concludes the first round of questioning, and there is at least time to start the second round of questioning, and I would like to invite Professor Halermans to ask a second question.
Thank you. Well, a second question I have is actually about the joint findings that you find in your 3 empirical chapters, chapters 2, 3, and 4. And it's actually a question with 2 sides. And I'm just going to ask it, and we'll see how far you get with respect to time in answering it. The first part is that in chapter 4, you conclude, and I quote, that the findings did not confirm a CO2 concentration of 3,000 ppm, that caused any effect on cognition, decision-making, or adverse health effects. So my first question would be why you would even expect to find anything in chapters 2 and 3 if in 4 you conclude that those levels do not have an effect, and whether you maybe should have reversed the order of your studies. Maybe related to that, also the differences between these 3 chapters, and also with respect to RCTs or quasi-experiments. I mean, in chapter 3 and 4, you have RCTs. In chapter 2, it's more a quasi-experiment because you couldn't randomly assign children to schools, and that's also the point Dr. Isferding was making. So I was also wondering whether, to look at it from a different point of view, is the result in chapter 2 even true? Is it not more likely that lower performing children have to go to the school that's closest to where they live, which may also not be a very advantaged neighborhood with not the best schools and not the best buildings? So could that not be driving the result that you find instead of the CO2? So 2 angles to a question on comparing the results between the chapters. I look forward to your answer.
The highly esteemed opponent, thank you for the question, which relates basically to the effect of socioeconomic status on test scores. And it is a question which I ask myself in terms of, do kids from a lower socioeconomic status are then having hit harder by exposure to bad air quality in that regards? I had from the Gezonde Basis School data set data on socioeconomic status, and that relates to the question before. Once I included that one, I lost more than half of my sample size. So I cannot make any statement how socioeconomic status is mediating that effect. In an optimal setup, I would also have this data.
But if I may...
You can briefly ask your question and you can briefly...
Very brief. I'm not asking if it's mediating. I'm really wondering if it's not actually that there is no effect, but that it's the socioeconomic status that leads to the lower test scores, and that it has nothing to do with air quality.
Given that there are so many studies who still have a strong effect of air quality on schools, and we are not the first one who find that, I would still be convinced to say that air quality has this effect, because it is in line with past studies.
Thank you.
Stefan Flagner, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Make the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Stefan Flagner, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Kok is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Dear Stefan, it's almost like a wedding vow. Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times? To be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible? Yes, I promise. That's great. By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee, here I hereby confer upon you, Stefan Flagner, the degree of doctor and grant you all the rights and obligations attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present with you the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, all members, and affixed with the official seal of the university. Yeah, now comes the fun part, Stefan. So, well, Stefan, you didn't have one, you didn't have two, you didn't have three, you didn't have four, you didn't have five, you had 6 supervisors. So, Wouter sitting over there because there was no space for him anymore. But we're all super proud to see you beaming here today and to see your stellar performance during your defense. And as Guy said, just when we conferred, we hadn't expected anything else, Stefan. So you started, and I actually had it wrong, not in 2018, but in 2017 with a Master of Sustainable Finance at the Faculty of Economics. We met each other during the real estate course. We did a field trip to Berlin in the days when sustainability still allowed us to fly with 50 students to Berlin. Can't do that anymore. And then you left academia briefly to work as a consultant for PwC in Luxembourg. Realized, that wasn't as great as they advertised. Nice lease cars, etc. So you came back and you actually went to FHML to do a master's program there. You really liked it, and exactly at that time, Wouter and Piet had secured some money actually from the people in this building to sponsor a joint position between FHML and SBE. You applied, and even though you didn't have a clue about what to do in the lab, I think Wouter and Guy believed you on your blue eyes, your German blue eyes, and we jointly hired you. And the pro-rector didn't mention it. I checked it. You're not the first one to get the joint degree between SBE and FHML, but you're the second in the entire history of this. It's not the oldest university in the Netherlands, but still the history is long enough that it's really unique to actually get a degree between both faculties. And it shows you, ladies and gentlemen, how special Stefan actually is. Over to you.
Thank you. Stefan, I think we've gotten to know each other quite well over the past 4.5 years, and not just me, but also Niels and your other supervisors, and not just work, but also personally. And that gives us the opportunity to sort of roast you already a little bit as we are standing here, me and Niels together. And we've came up with 3 different Stefans. Not this in a wrong way, schizophrenic or anything, but 3 sort of characteristics of Stefan. And the first Stefan is the strong man, figuratively I start with. And the strong man means that he has to manage, which has been said a couple of times, 6 supervisors, but 6 supervisors from real estate, economics, engineering, and health sciences. And I think actually, because I know Wouter is not sitting with us, but he was really important in this as well. So that's the 6th, but Hannah up there, the 7th maybe, because I think she also helped you quite a lot. So it's like herding a flock of sheep, basically. And even to try to get an appointment with all these supervisors is a terrible thing to do. But there was one. You were lucky, there was one lucky thing, is that we all found each other in good wine and dining. So you only had to book dinner at Vino and Friends, and we would all show up. And that, otherwise, if you hadn't done that, we probably wouldn't have been standing here.
Well, the other Stefan, the strong man, is obviously in the literal sense, because this guy, Stefan, is sports. Probably all of you know this. I mean, if you don't know Stefan. But Stefan has really immersed kind of the sports culture, in the department, in his life, in everything. And of course, a couple of memories stand out here. And one of them, actually, my wife reminded me, was the rope pulling contest at the biannual department weekend in the Ardennes, where Stefan was rope pulling. Well, I didn't even compete. I don't think Pete even tried, but against the other strong men in the department. Martijn, he went down, and then other people, they all went down, and Stefan eventually, came out as the strongest man. And, again, we hadn't expected anything else. Now, you've taken that a little further. There's high rocks competitions. There's actually health tips coming from Stefan on an almost daily basis, whether that's sunlight in the morning. So I now, every morning, first go outside. I even got a dog for that to make sure I get enough sunlight, because that's very important advice from Stefan. My kids adore Stefan. I actually said that I went to see Stefan. They were hoping they could join to play soccer with you. Or maybe with Rachel. That's kind of unclear. That could be the proxy. Stefan just a proxy to get to Rachel's skills. But hey, you haven't just made sports a central theme with your colleagues, but also with the kids. I know you advised Dennis kids on sports. So you've taken it, really taken it quite far. You even do some of your teaching outside. You talked about Kimon. So your sports obsession, I would say, is even in the teaching. And I think, by the way, that's a good thing.
Okay, so then we have Stefan, the good man. Ein guter Mann, yeah? Is that correct? Yeah. So we're going to again approach it in 2 ways. So the good man in how you manage your studies, and also the multidisciplinarity has been mentioned several times before. But running a lab study is totally different from getting the data from a primary school study is totally different from setting up a field study with university students. And then you also manage to get international experts together to write a positioning paper, right? The 10 questions paper. So all these different fields you managed really well. I'm not convinced yet if I would let you draw blood from me, but you did gain quite some medical skills on the way as well. We could try when I'm, yeah. And just to add also on the getting to know a little bit outside of work as well, I remember one little thing that you and Rachel were babysitting my son. I think he was 1.5 maybe at that time. And we were only gone for like 3 hours. But when we came home, there were 2 people sleeping, and my son wasn't one of them.
All right, well, I won't invite you to my house then. Stefan, du bist auch ein guter Mann. Und Guy hat das schon gesagt. Und ich mache das hier auf Deutsch, dass deine Eltern es gut verstehen können. Mein Deutsch ist nicht super gut, also ich will es mal versuchen. Weil ich werde nie vergessen, dass du zu einer Konferenz nach Hawaii wolltest, zusammen mit Martijn, der ist nicht hier leider, aber dass du doch nicht gegangen bist. Weil du Geld sparen wolltest, damit du und dein Bruder euren Eltern helfen könntet, vielleicht ein Haus kaufen oder etwas. Ich wünsche mir, Stefan, dass meine Kinder so toll werden wie du.
What do you think the third Stefan would be? The German. So you are a real German, I think, in our opinion. You drive a German car, right? You are very pünktlich. You are overly organized. Apparently, also, you dislike nuclear energy, like all Germans, and you eat a warm meal during midday. And I also added myself that you do like a little bit of hierarchy. You really like executive decisions, as you call them. And in health sciences, there's not a lot of executive decisions, I can tell you that.
Yeah, Stefan. But the good news is, at least for the Dutch here, that I think you've become a little bit more Dutchman rather than just German. Early in his PhD, Stefan moved to Aachen. So we kind of felt Stefan moving away from us, becoming more German. He even bought a bike from the infamous bike plan, because Stefan was going to bike from Aachen to Maastricht on a daily basis. Well, there's now a running joke in the department. You know this German guy who bought a bike from Aachen to Maastricht? You know him? Well, you know, he didn't. Because that's Stefan. What he did is he drove to the medical faculty, parked his car there, and then would bike from there to the economics faculty to have meetings there and then bike back. So yeah, Stefan, we saw it all slipping away. But then, luckily, he met Rachel Hoekstra. Hoekstra, ladies and gentlemen. And we felt that things were going again in the right direction. Because Hoekstra, we like. And what happened? He moved back from Aachen to Maastricht. Even close to Belgium. So that's maybe a bit too far. But you moved back to the Netherlands. So you became a bit more Dutch. And you know, I really like this Hoekstra story. And in your dissertation, you write that behind every successful man is a strong woman. Well, I think the strong woman in this case stands before you. And I also hope that she's going to strong arm you at some point when little Stefans or Rachels appear on this world. And that's not like an if, but a when, because they're already engaged. You know, that's, you know, he didn't tell you, but yeah, that's how it goes. And he says it was a must do for visa reasons, but it's, you know, at the end of the day, that's what I said, you know, and I'm still married. So I have good hopes for little Rachels and Stefans, but she's going to strong arm you that their last name is going to be Hoekstra. Pretty sure about it. All right, I think we got to wrap up here. We had 3 Stefans.
That's enough.
Yeah? Okay, you want to...
3 Stefans is enough, I think.
You want to say more or not?
Just congratulations, Stefan.
We have a present.
Do you?
On behalf of you. Okay.
I know we have a present. You hand over. I will hand over. You tell.
I talk? Okay, good. Well, okay, Stefan. So 6 people. So we had some budget. That's good. And we also had various ideas. Now you're off on your own, and you know you no longer have your 6.5 person supervisory team, you know, to from time to time coach you, because I think you're, you know, one good thing about you is that you're very coachable. Pete actually mentioned that just in our deliberation. But there's going to be many moments where you're going to be confronted with, you know, with Dusan and team, or where, you know, you're a little agitated. Stefan can also sometimes become, it's part of the German. So we thought, okay, what do we give him so he kind of, you know, thinks about us and he stays relaxed? So we found something that really fits very well with Stefan, the sportsman, but also I think really how you see life. And it's called an arrow fit. Well, I can't take it out, but you basically put it in your mouth and you got to breathe really hard or really slow. You got to train every day on your lung capacity, on your breathing strength, both in and out. So our suggestion is, from all 6 of us, when you get an email and you're annoyed, or you get an email and you're excited, don't hit send, don't hit reply right away. Take your arrow fit out, take a deep breath, and just delete that email, okay? Now, it is not German, but it is Danish, so Paul will be very happy. And I heard that your new government's probably going to invade Denmark anyway to make it part of Germany. So, Stefan, congratulations on behalf of all of us. And we look forward to following your meteoric rise in your career and being in touch.
Dear Dr. Flagner, also on behalf of the Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree that you have acquired. I would like you to ask you, say, after I have closed the session, to stay a bit, because we want to take 2 pictures, one here inside with the members who are online and one on the stairs. And I would like the audience already to go to the rafter where we will soon join you afterwards. And hereby I close this academic session.
No, thank you. Thank you for the